Hi everyone and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Aerys I, perhaps not one of the most famous of the Targaryen rulers, but I think one of the most interesting, because it is at this point, and we'll get into this in just one moment, but it is at this point in Targaryen history where we're probably at the height of Targaryen magiciness. We'll dig into what that means in a little bit, but he was a king who was very, very focused in on prophecy and the higher mysteries, and he surrounded himself with people who were also interested in prophecy and the higher mysteries. And his reign is one that we see the background of in the Dunk and Egg stories, certainly two of the three that we have so far. So we have not just what the history books say, the world of ice and fire and the like, but also through Dunk's eyes, the people that he's meeting, what the people of Westeros were thinking about his reign and rule at the time. So we're getting this from two different angles, which is absolutely fantastic. But let's start off with who he is and do, as I always try to do, a little bit of an overview of his reign, his rule, and who he is. Well, we're not told the exact day that year that he was born in, but it's the 170s. He is the second-born son of Deeren II, King Deeren II, who we were looking at quite recently. Deeren II, you will remember, he was the king who brought dawn into the Seven Kingdoms. He married a Martell himself. He married his sister to a Martell, and during his reign there was the first of the Blackfire rebellions, which got put down, and when he as his reign goes on, we see the tail end of his reign just in the first of the Dunk and Egg stories, the Hedge Knight. He had a son and heir, Baelor, known as Baelor Breakspear, who everybody liked. He seemed, from what we see in Dunk and Egg, he seemed to be a good person. He seemed to be a good, charismatic leader. He seemed to be wise. He seemed to be understanding. He seemed to be everything you might want in a ruler. However, as we saw in the Hedge Knight, spoilers, I suppose, for the TV show, but we're just going off the books here, Baelor dies in the Trial of the Seven, defending Dunk effectively. And that is a huge blow for the Seven Kingdoms, for the succession, because everybody thought they knew, they understood what was going to happen. They knew who was going to be taking over as king when Deeren died. And so what we see in Dunk and Egg feels like quite a small story because we're seeing it through Dunk's eyes, but actually this is a huge turning point in the history of Westeros. However, Baelor had two sons, and so everybody thinks, fine, we know where we're going. We missed out on Baelor, but his eldest son, he seems to be a good guy as well. This is going to be okay. Deeren's second son, Baelor was the first. Deeren's second son was Aerys. So Aerys grew up never thinking that he would be king. He was not prepared to be king. His elder brother was going to be king. When his elder brother accidentally was killed, then there were two more sons there waiting in line. He was not expecting to be king. But then came a huge, I mean, you could probably even call it a sort of a catastrophe for the Seven Kingdoms. The Great Spring Sickness happened. The Great Spring Sickness was, I mean, the equivalent of sort of the European, the Black Plague or something like that. This had a huge impact. It hit almost everywhere. Dorne managed to survive. The Vale of Arryn managed to survive. Both of them, they just shut down their ports. They're both surrounded by mountain ranges. They closed the ways in. They shut themselves off. Everywhere else, though, it hit bad. And We're told that Lannisport had it bad, Old Town had it even worse, but King's Landing had it the worst of all. 40% of people in King's Landing died. The bodies were piled up and they were many feet high. All of the Silent Sisters, the Faith of the Seven priestesses, effectively, who looked after the dying, all of them in King's Landing, they died. The High Septon died, and crucially for the Targaryen succession, King Daeron II also died, as did both of his grandsons, sons of Baelor Breakspear. In the space of, we're not told the exact time, but it was early on in the Great Spring Sickness. And this meant that Aerys, Daeron's second son, suddenly became king. He wasn't expecting. He wasn't wanting it, particularly, as far as we can tell. What we're told about him is that he was bookish. He was not, he doesn't appear to be particularly martial. He doesn't appear to have wanted to go out and fight, join the army, go to tourneys, or anything like that. We're told that he was very focused in on researching things like prophecy, things like the higher mysteries, magic, stuff like that. His first significant act was to appoint Bloodraven as his Hand of the King. Now, we've got questions about why and all the rest of it in a moment, but Bloodraven from that moment on basically ruled the Seven Kingdoms. There's a 12-year reign for Aerys, and during that time he appears not to have really engaged in ruling. He just left that bit up to Bloodraven. He just did his own thing. He stayed well apart from the messy business of actually running the kingdom. He was married to Lady Penrose, but seemed to have no interest in her. As far as we can tell, he was asexual. We're not told anything other than the fact that he didn't spend any time with her. She never became pregnant. Apparently, the marriage was never even consummated. And we're told rather dismissively that he would rather take a book to bed than a woman. The small council tried to persuade him to set her aside. If he didn't like her, then maybe he might like somebody else. And he said, no. That's not what's going on here. I'm going to stay married. And therefore, he had no heir. Which meant that, and we'll come on to his heirs in just one moment, which meant that he had a succession of other heirs that he went through during his time. So he came into this crisis. This happens with a lot of Targaryen kings. As we've been going through this series, a lot of Targaryen kings become kings in the middle of a crisis. And his crisis was the Great Spring Sickness. Now, this lasted, we're told, over the span of 2 years. Bloodraven dealt with it in what seems like a very strong way. He ordered bodies just to be burnt. He shut things down. People, you couldn't get, if your family member died from this, they were not getting the equivalent of the last rites. They were not getting buried. There were no proper funerals. Their body was just piled up and it was burnt. This immediately started causing a little bit of disgruntlement amongst the small folk. It was effective. The spring sickness, when spring moved on into summer, the spring sickness did pass. But it didn't win him any friends. What followed on from that, though, was a drought. In the summer, it was a hot summer, and a huge amount of people died in the spring. Not just the well-to-do people. We're talking about kings and princes. The Grey Lion, the Lord Lannister died, Lord Hightower died, lots of the sort of high and mighty died, but also the small folk, the farmers, the normal people, also huge amounts of them died. And what did this mean? Harvest did not really happen. Farming did not really happen. People were just playing catch up. They were just trying to survive. And there was a drought and there was a bit of a famine. And this again started to get blamed on Bloodraven. Amongst all of this, this disgruntlement amongst the people, this started to feed and foment feelings in an already divided kingdom, which had had this first Blackfire rebellion, and it had been split down the middle, which side people were on. Deeren had tried to be as fair as he could, but also he was very firm. People who were against him, they were punished. They lost lands, they lost title, they lost income if you were on the wrong side of that battle, the rebellion. We see this in Dunk and Egg. This is a huge part of the Swan Sword, is these grievances against Deeren about what followed. And that was still bubbling under because it wasn't just Deeren. Bloodraven was very clearly on that side as well. Bloodraven was now ruling the land as far as anyone could see. Now, this meant that people were thinking, well, hang on a minute. There's still a possibility of having a Blackfire on the throne because, yes, Daemon Blackfire and his two eldest sons had been killed, but he had 7. There were more men, several more Blackfire descendants just waiting in Essos with a whole load of exiles just waiting to come over. And an emissary went over from Battlewell, went over in Old Peak. Part of this disgruntlement went over and said, can we try and get a Blackfire back here ruling? Persuaded the heir Daemon, second Blackfire, to come over, but basically a conference where they could all plot sedition and rebellion. That is what happened in the second Blackfire rebellion, and we see that in the third Dunk and Egg story. That gets shut down. How does that get shut down? Well, it turns out that Bloodraven has informants everywhere. He has started running the equivalent of a police state with informers everywhere. Huge amount of his information. He's Hand of the King. He's also Master of Whisperers. A huge amount of his information comes from, I'm sure, sources, but also informants across the realm. And again, this is effective in ruling the realm, but it's not loved. People are very suspicious. While all of this is happening, over in the Iron Islands, Dagon Greyjoy sees weakness. The ruler of the Seven Kingdoms appears weak. They're looking to the east, constantly concerned about the Blackfires. He starts raiding along the west coast, all across Lannister land, down into the Reach, all as far high as the north. Down south, he gets down to the Arbor. He raids the Arbor, this beautiful wine-producing island. He raids the Fair Isles. This is trouble on both sides for the realm. But Bloodraven seems to tighten his grip. At some point, we don't get the whole story. At some point, Dagon Greyjoy is defeated by the Targaryens. The second Blackfire Rebellion is put down before it even really starts. The third Blackfire Rebellion happens. We're not told a huge amount of detail about that. That seems to be something George R. R. Martin is wanting to hold for future Dunk and Egg stories. We're not told a huge amount of detail about that, but that is also defeated. During this time, though, we have, I've said Aerys I seems to have almost taken a back seat in ruling the Seven Kingdoms. He started out, and the Targaryens as a whole started out during this period with a plethora of options for who's going to be succeeding the king. After the Dance of the Dragons, there were concerns. There weren't many Targaryens left then. By the time, just before Aerys took over, there were so many Targaryens, they were actually starting to be a bit concerned about what to do with them all. And so, actually, one of them gets sent off. Aemon gets sent off down to the Citadel. This is the Maester Aemon that we know about. He gets sent down to the Citadel to become a Maester, taking him out of the line of succession. That's how there were so many. But then they start dying suspiciously. And this is something which goes all the way through this period. Now, each and every individual one of these perhaps could be explained away, but that cannot be denied is the fact that Targaryens, during this 25-odd year period here of 12 years of Aerys' rule, another 12 years of Maekar after him, Targaryens died at about the rate of one a year. This is massive. First, we have Baelor, of course. Then we have the Great Spring Sickness, and we have Dirun, and then the two grandsons die. Then Aerys, when he takes over, he has a think. Who is he going to have as his heir? He's not got any children himself, so the natural next in line is his brother, Dirun. King Dirun II had 4 sons. Aerys was the second. The third was Rhaegal. Now, Rhaegal, we don't hear huge amounts about, but we're told that he was mad. Now, the only evidence of this that we're told is one anecdote of a time when he was found dancing naked around the Red Keep. We don't know. We don't know what that was all about, but he was very generally viewed with a little bit of suspicion. And he died. He died choking on a lamprey pie. Suspicious? Perhaps. But after he died, Aerys had to choose another heir. But thankfully, Rhaegal had 3 children, and 1 son, 2 daughters. The eldest son was Aelor. Aelor and his twin sister Aelora were married. Now we get again into this kind of thing where George R. R. Martin, he sometimes just throws these sentences out there in things like The World of Ice and Fire, and just we know there's a story there somehow. But we're not told it. We will have to wait for Fire and Blood for the full story. But we're told Aelor died killed by his wife in a mishap. Now, feel free to let your mind go wherever it wishes with that. George R. R. Martin clearly doesn't wish to tell us any more details than that. But it's then the plot thickens even further, because then we go on. Again, this is just literally 2 or 3 sentences in The World of Ice and Fire. Then we go on. Aerys, having lost his second heir, then says, "Okay, well, Aelora, she can take over. The wife can now take over as heir." But she is racked with guilt, it would appear, and she kills herself. But not just she kills herself after being attacked at a ball by 3 characters known to history only as see if I can remember this, the pig, the ox, and the rat. Full stop. And now let's talk about something else. And it's like, are you just going to leave it there, George? Is that there's a story there? Something happened, and we're not being told what it is. Perhaps we will be told about this in Fire and Blood Part 2. I mean, I hope we will in Fire and Blood Part 2. Anyway, she is then out of the line of succession. Their sister Daelora is she's considered simple, perhaps in the same way that we get Helena when we see in Dance of the Dragons on House of the Dragon. Maybe this means that she was a dragon dreamer. We don't know, but she seems to have been excluded from the family tree, and also she married Aerion Targaryen, who nobody liked, and they had a son who they rather menacingly named Maegor, after Maegor the Cruel. So she seems to have got sort of passed over in the line of succession, and eventually Aerys decides to, as the fourth effort at having an heir, he names Maekar, his other brother, who does eventually take over from him. Aerys, we're told, dies after 12 years as king. He dies of natural causes. There's no hint that there's anything worse than that going on, but he was, again, I don't know the exact date of birth, but he was about 50, so that's not unreasonable. So how do we judge this reign as a whole? Well, it's quite a tough one because he doesn't seem to rule. As far as we can tell, he leaves this to Bloodraven. This is very much Bloodraven ruling in his stead. And he himself focuses in on his studies. What comes of them, we're not told. He seems obsessed with prophecy, the higher mysteries, but we're not told that anything in particular comes of them. I started this, though, by saying that of all of the eras of the Targaryens, this was the one that seems the most magic-y. What I mean by that is that he, who seems more than any other focused in on this stuff, that there are kings who cared about prophecy before and after, but none who that was their consuming passion. So there's him. His hand of the king is Bloodraven, who even then everyone was saying he's a sorcerer. He's dabbling in the dark arts. He's getting information by turning into wolves and birds and all sorts of stuff. Bloodraven, his paramour was Shira Seastar. This was her time. We don't read huge amounts about her, but she was also a magic user. She was around. The High Septon, we're told, was appointed, and he, so the Grand Maester, sorry, I said the High Septon, the Grand Maester was appointed, and he also was accused of being a magic user. There are magic users right in the heart of power here. We're not told. Obviously, the Maesters don't tell us much about that in their histories, but it's there and it's at the heart of what's going on. And we see this when we're reading Dunk and Egg. This happens behind the scenes when Dunk or Egg are talking to just random people they come across. Again and again and again, this comes out. This is a matter of fear. People fear Bloodraven because he uses magic. People look down on the king because he's obsessed with prophecy, things like that. This is not seen by the people as a good thing. It might be a strong regime because Bloodraven is running it in a strong manner, but it is not a strong regime because the people love. So this is a sort of a rocky time for the Seven Kingdoms, but they make it through. Maekar, when he takes over, is a very different kind of king, as we'll look at next time. But the whole feel does carry on. This is the time of magic, when magic becomes the focus. We've had times when the Targaryens were pious. We've had times when they were trying to invade people. This is when they were focusing in on magic. So let's have a quick look in the chat. Had a few super chats just before we went on air. Thank you very much. Caitlin Ozdemir, or possibly Caitlin Ozdemir, saying long time watcher and just want to say thank you. Thank you. Was a teacher for 9 years, but will graduate with my engineering degree on Friday. Starting my job as an aerospace engineer on Monday. Your videos got me through the stress. Well, thank you very much for saying that, and congratulations for graduating an engineering degree. Aerospace engineer sounds very impressive. So I wish you all the very best of luck with that new career. I'm sure you won't need any luck, but yes, congratulations on that. GG81 saying, thank you, Robert, received my T-shirt today. Yes, the T-shirt, if you signed up for the Patreon offer to sign up at $10 level Patreon, send you out one of the fantastic T-shirts we've got. Fantastic design. They were designed by Sam Rexian, who is a fantastic artist. When in doubt, blame Blood Raven. There's a link to the shop down below if you're interested in that. But if you got one of the initial offer, then they went out in the post over the last couple of weeks. So hopefully we should be getting them now. I think I had another question here from Pedro Enrique saying, Hola, Robert, hola. What do you think George R. R. Martin is trying to tell us with the bookish king or lord? It seems a recurring type in A Song of Ice and Fire. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's trying to tell us a thing with this, other than the fact that people see this as weak. This is still a world in which strength of arms is seen as a good thing. And so if you are the type of king who is bookish, then that is generally perceived by people to be something that can be exploited. Now, where we get to, though, is Rhaegar, who perhaps is obviously a few generations still down further in the family tree, but he's perhaps this moment when these two different one who's all about fighting, one who's all about the books, they come together because he was bookish, and then something he read in a scroll made him decide that he needed to be a warrior, a fighter at night, and then went out and trained hard to become one. So this is it's not just like a dichotomy, I don't think, but George Martin himself is more bookish than fighting, so his natural is the bookish people. But I think he is trying to reflect the world that he has built and the way that people view kings in that time. Dr. Debunk saying Dunk destroys the Targaryen dynasty. There is, and I'm sure I'll come back to this. I've said this many times before. That Dunk is ever with the something like a Targaryen. Dunk, wherever he seems to go, fate swirls around him. Magical things, important things happen just because he's there, as far as we can tell. The Hedge Knight, when you read it just as a standalone story without knowing the wider context, then you don't quite understand how significant this is. Get the heir to the throne dies in it because defending Dunk. This leads Makar to be an incredibly introverted and focused person because he dealt the killing blow to his own brother, and that affects him. We'll talk about it more next week, but that affects him for the rest of his life. You move on, and then Dunk is there when you get this second Blackfire rebellion. We will see again and again his decision to go to Dawn saved Egg's life because Dawn was the place where the Great Spring Sickness did not touch. There's something about him that will take us all the way through to Summerhall, where his actions will again be hugely important. He is not a magical person, but magic and fate swirl around him. Let's go to a question from, I think I had another one in here somewhere. Yes, here we go. Richard Smith. What does it mean to be good at magic? Some seem to grasp it scientifically. For others, it appears more intuitive or innate. Have natural users just stumbled upon the rules that Qyburn figured out through study? Well, this is a really interesting question. George R. R. Martin, I would highly recommend you go check out. He's done a few interviews where he's touched on this subject. Most recently, the one he did with History of Westeros. You can go, it's on their YouTube channel. Feel free to go and find that. One of the things he talks about there is his approach to magic. And he says that he deliberately wants to keep the mechanisms of magic mysterious, secret. He says that if you break it down to, here are the ingredients of doing a spell, Eye of Newt, whatever, that kind of thing, once you actually start doing that, it turns into something that becomes less scary because you can quantify it, you know it. Perhaps you can just do it yourself. But if you do not understand all of those rules, then you don't know which way magic is coming from. You don't know how powerful magic can be. You don't know what it could do, and you don't know who could do it. So this is deliberate on George R. R. Martin's part, not quantifying exactly how magic works and therefore what being good at magic is. That said, we can sort of see a few things. There are some principles of magic. I've promised for about 5 years now. Now, at some point, I will do the grand overview of how magic operates in George R. Martin's world. But there are some clear principles. One of these clear principles is that the law of intentionality. You have to be intending to do magic. Magic just doesn't suddenly appear for no reason, and there has to be some degree of sacrifice. Something you have to pay for the magic in some way. Now, being good at magic means that you understand how to do this, but also there is a degree of, some people are born with it. Some people can be trained in it. So when you think about northern magic, with the sort of magic of the old gods, Bran clearly was born with a latent potentiality for magic, but that had to be awoken. But he also had to want it. He had to do it. He had to embrace it. Qyburn seems to have, if you leave aside for one moment what you think about, morally think about the person, he seems to have figured out some of the rules of how the world works. A slight digression here, but he tells Jamie this story about when he was in Citadel and he went into a room and he looked, there was a chair there, and on the chair there was a bit of a cushion on it. There was an indentation on the cushion, and in the air there was the faint smell of a perfume. And he knew that meant that although a person was not there, he was alone in the room. Just beforehand, a woman had been sitting on that chair, and that's because something lingered. Is the words that he used. Something lingered, and that is like the spirit after bodily death in this world. That seems to be a law, and that seems to be right as far as we can understand. When we see people like Beric, when we see people like Lady Stoneheart, is that they can come back, but not all of them comes back. They lose parts of themselves. The bits that they retain are the bits that are most core to who they are or what they all wanted to do when they died. So Lady Stoneheart Catelyn Stark was dead for a while. When she came back as Lady Stoneheart, what was left was this burning need for revenge against the people who had wronged her. So that was what lingered. So yeah, there are rules. There are things out there that actually you can learn and understand. Certainly, Melisandre learnt a lot about how magic works over time. People in the Shy learn how magic works. Qyburn seems to be learning how magic works. There are rules, but we're not ever going to be told about the because that would be exactly how it all works, because that would break the mystique that George R. R. Martin is trying to create. Kraken Tacos, hi there, saying hello, Robert. It's been a while. I just wanted to say hello. Well, hello to you. It's fantastic to see you. Let's. It's been a while. I changed the channel, but I've just added you on as a moderator because you're a fine fellow. So there we go. Let's have a quick. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Kirsty Angel just saying, before I forget, in reference to Small Paul, I've actually got nothing on him, but House Dunks, the phrase dunk the lunk, basically. So, yeah, I think this is a reference to one of my shorts on this channel, IDG Live. I'm releasing a lot of short form videos now, just a minute or less, trying to encapsulate some of the smaller thoughts that aren't worth perhaps a 15-minute video, but well, I think are still points worth making. One of which was an incredibly, it's only a long video, so I'll spoil the entire video. But hey, I've got a track record of spoiling my own videos. The, there's a character that we meet in the Night's Watch called Small Paul, who I think very likely to be a descendant of Dunk. Why? Because he's referred to very early on as thick as a castle wall, which we know is what Dunk says about himself all the time. Dunk the lunk, thick as a castle wall. And then you just get again and again these things. He is tall, he's very tall and very strong. He's not the cleverest, yet he sacrifices himself to save other people. The characteristics of Dunk come out again and again. So I think that there's a good chance that that is just George R. R. Martin dropping a little something extra in there for us. Andrew Kay saying, for me, Aerys's reign is somewhere between mid-table and relegation, if we're putting people in the league table, I guess. His bookish disinterest leads to vulnerability issues and some general decline. Bloodraven mitigated a worsening. Yeah, I'd be interested to know what everyone else in the chat where they rate him. And I'm not really somebody to sort of like produce league tables of these things, but as a king, how do you rate him? I mean, I think I would find it hard to disagree. Just him on his own, unless we learn something else that he was doing. When you read the histories of that time, it's not actually a history of him. He doesn't do that much. He becomes king, and then he makes a few decisions. We learn about the decision, no, I'm not going to divorce my wife. We learn about the decision to make Bloodraven the hand of the king. We also learn of a decision much later on when we get the third Blackfire Rebellion happens and is put down. They actually capture Aegor Rivers, the legend himself, who is the power behind the throne in terms of the Blackfires. And this seems to have been a disagreement between Bloodraven and Aerys. Bloodraven says, we've got to kill him. Bloodraven wants to kill all of the Blackfires. And Aerys says, no, we're sending him to the wall. Now, the interesting thing there is that he didn't ever get to the wall. I know, Maura, you were asking about this. there were still lots of people sympathetic to the Blackfires who leaked this information out. He's going to be on this boat heading north at this time, um, and the boat is just in the narrow sea heading north up towards Eastwatch. When it gets captured, he gets freed, goes back to uh, Essos, and just starts plotting again for the next Blackfire Rebellion. So it was a decision, but it didn't seem to have the end result that he wanted. Um, Lucian saying, I feel like the lack of limelight given to Aerys I's reign is a front. Much like Viserys II, I imagine there was much going on behind closed doors. Yeah, we don't know what he was doing. So say that the information we have about what he was doing is actually quite limited. Um, and Andrew Kay saying, as an administrative king, quite poor, and reign had quite a few issues, but perhaps magically, prophetically, is where Aerys I contributed with knowledge. Again, we do not know. Krakatako saying, uh, I think I fall into the broken man category. Actually, well, I thought you were saying that Aerys II does. Okay, let's go to Uzo Ahmed saying, hey, first time watching. Great to see you. Let's go to a question from Jay. This is, as always, I try to frame these live streams around questions from my patrons. So here's the first one saying, hey, Robert, hope you're well. Please talk about the Great Spring Sickness and its after effects on the realm. Thank you. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this. The most obvious one is clearly the loss of the King Deer II, and the next two people in line. The first and biggest impact is putting Aerys I onto the throne. However, there were a few others. The drought, I think, is another one which we'd talk about the spring sickness, but the drought, the harvest, and the lack of food afterwards, that created disgruntlement across the kingdom. This is what created the atmosphere that allowed people to start thinking about another Blackfire rebellion. If that hadn't happened, if the takeover, the handover from Dylan II to Aerys I had been nice and smooth and easy, and they'd ruled without had there been all of these people dying and people not finding food and all the things like that, then probably the call for or the sympathy within the Seven Kingdoms for a Blackfire rebellion would not be there. When you're reading Duncan Egg, those second and third stories, everybody they've got thoughts that they don't like Bloodraven. They're grumbling about things that are going on to the extent that Egg even has to pipe up at one point and say the sickness, the drought, they're not Bloodraven's fault. You can blame him for other things, but those things aren't his fault. People were blaming the powers that be for everything that was going on, and they were grumbling. So there's that. It led perhaps indirectly to the second Blackfire Rebellion. Another way, in fact, it led to the second Blackfire Rebellion was some of the people who died in the spring sickness were hostages in the Red. What Diran II had done after the first Blackfire Rebellion was he'd sort of be very firm, but tried to be as fair as he could with the people who'd been on the wrong side. He couldn't punish and take away the lands and titles of absolutely everybody who'd supported the Blackfires, because that was half of the Seven Kingdoms. So he had to leave a situation where some people who'd rebelled against him were still in power, albeit much lessened power. The way that he held them in check was that he took hostages from a handful of these crucial houses. He said, okay, your eldest son is going to be kept hostage in the Red Keep. your daughter, your nephew, knowing that if he held these hostages, then those families who probably they had definitely risen up in rebellion against him, and now he's taken away their lands and castles and things like that, and so they probably hate him even more. They're going to think twice against rebelling again because Deer held their family members hostage. What happened in the Spring Sickness is those hostages died. So suddenly that hold that the Iron Throne had over these disgruntled families was gone. And so they could then start plotting again without fear of losing their loved ones. So it's an odd little twist. And then the third one, or the third, fourth, whatever we got up to, kind of medium term effect was, we're not shown it, but it was there. That King's Landing emptied out. We're told that a quarter of all properties in King's Landing were empty after the Spring Sickness because people had just died. Families had died, businesses had shut down. The impact on the economy and the impact on people's lives was massive. This would have taken them years to get back to just where they were to start with. So, although we often read about what happened to the rich and powerful, the 1% in society, we will see increasingly, I suspect, with Dunk and Egg, as they're talking to normal people, what the impact is in the wider world. That the people, the Seven Kingdoms went through a really bad time for quite a while. It would have taken them a generation to get back to where they were before. Question. Mitra, did I say take over instead of hand over? I meant hand over. Let's go to a question from Johnny Targ saying, Hola, Robert. Hola. Any insight into the circumstances as to why Aerys chose Bloodraven to be Hand of the King over his own brother, Maekar? Now, we don't know. And this is set up as a mystery. It's set up as something that we should be a little unsure about. Because if you skim through the Dunk and Egg stories, the second and third Dunk and Egg stories, there are many references, like 8 or 9 references to Maekar being in some. He was the Prince of Summerhall. He stayed in Summerhall, brooding in Summerhall, and holding a grudge against his brother, and presumably because he was not made Hand of the King. Now, this is an interesting one because there's no assumption that he should have immediately. If you look at it, a lot of kings decided that they wanted their heir to be their Hand of the King. Baelor, for example, was the Hand of the King to his father. The idea being that the heir can learn about how to rule the kingdom before they become king themselves. So if Aerys wanted to go down that route, then he would have put one of his heirs in as a Hand of the King, but he didn't. So Maekar shouldn't have felt that by some kind of divine right he was owed being the Hand of the King. It seems to be actually more of a personality clash with Bloodraven. Again, we get throwaway remarks in Dunk and Egg where we get, if Aerys dies, then there would be a civil war between Bloodraven and Maekar, between the two. It's like people think that the two of them, it's not actually Aerys who's the issue here. He's just taken a step back. It's Bloodraven and Maekar. Now, why might Aerys have chosen Bloodraven over Maekar? If he's decided he doesn't want his heir to be the Hand of the King, he wants somebody competent. They both appear competent, but who who fits best with Aerys? Is it the very dour, very strong, very clear fighting type Maker, or is it the quieter, subtler, more magic-focused Bloodraven? I think we know which way Aerys naturally will have turned. And Bloodraven had proven his loyalty. Let's not forget this. Bloodraven had been incredibly, during the first Blackfire Rebellion, he had been very, very strongly on side. Maker had as well, and in fact, one of the grievances that he appears to have is the fact that he was also involved in a very important way in that battle, the decisive battle in Bowgrass Fields, but he was never given the credit for it. He was just like, oh yeah, and he was there too, kind of thing. But he was there leading the charge. He was there, and the hammer and the anvil were told, and he was the anvil rather than the hammer that just like pounded down against the rebellion. And he played a decisive role. However, Bloodraven had shown his ability. He was the person. His archers were the ones that did the damage, killing Daemon's two heirs, and then he was the person who came and fought Aegor Rivers and forced Aegor Rivers to retreat. So this was a victory for Bloodraven, and he had proven his loyalty, and it would appear that Deeren was probably leaning on him more and more for information, as at the very least Master of Whisperers. When we get the new King Aerys, who does he choose? The person who's already in there knows all of the secrets already. You know he's absolutely loyal, and he's on your wavelength. He understands that you just want to read your books about prophecy. He gets that. He's not going to bother you. He'll just do all the bits you don't want to worry about. Or do you want this person coming in who is clearly there's a personality clash. He's going to come in and judge you for what you're doing or not doing. I think it's a straightforward option. The issue is more the fact that there's a personality clash going on there than this was an odd decision. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. What if Dr. Debunk saying, what if Aerys the First, since he was bookish, wrote his own book about Targaryen history, or A Prince Who Was Promised, and Rhaegar later discovered that book or research and decided to become that prince? It's possible. We don't know that he wrote anything, but it would certainly make some sense. And let's go to a question from Commander Ray, saying, hello, Robert. Aerys was known for his passion for reading and prophecies. While the implications are rather clear that the Song of Ice and Fire or Prince That Was Promised were the ones that he might have obsessed over, like Rhaegar does, I wonder what decisions he made with this in mind, making Bloodraven his hand, sending enemies to the wall, perhaps his decision not to produce an heir, so on. Now, this is really interesting because we don't get many decisions. You say you've outlined the three main decisions that we read about making. Might they be the result of him wishing to follow prophecy? I think there's a fair to medium chance that although he was obsessed with this, he wasn't ever putting it in action. He was more the researcher, and this is we're so used to Targaryens being the people who go out and do stuff, but he doesn't seem to be a very doing person. He appears to be the person who reads and reflects and tries to understand things. There are perfectly reasonable reasons why he might have done all of those things. not having children, not consummating his marriage. As I said, perhaps he was just asexual. There's no particular reason why he thought, oh, this was because this other branch of the family needs to take over. If he actually thought that and was in line with the branch of the family that did finally take over, then he was a long time naming his heir as being the person who's there. Perhaps we don't know. Perhaps there's a whole thing here that we just do not understand about him. Perhaps he secretly was killing off people. Certainly those deaths of his first three heirs are very suspicious sounding. The choking on a lamprey pie, the mishap murder, the killing themselves after a ball. There's a story there, but if that were Aerys, then why not just name somebody else the heir? Why go through all of that rigmarole? It makes a lot more sense that that was Bloodraven behind the scenes. So my instinct is that he wasn't making decisions in order to do particular things. This was Bloodraven who was doing all this. Anders Graham saying, okay, but people died in weird ways in medieval times. Yes, and this is the thing I always come back to with this, is that taken on individually, any one of the deaths that happened in this 20-odd year period of the Targaryen rule, taken individually, any of these deaths you could just write off and say, well, sometimes these things happen. I mean, sometimes you get like an odd death. That's not the suspicious thing. The suspicious thing is the fact that people dying in unexpected ways, young, happened at an incredibly regular. Targaryens dying in unexpected ways, young, happened on an incredibly regular basis during that period. We can say, yes, there was a spring sickness. People died in the spring sickness. There was an accident at a tourney which somebody died in. Somebody happened to choke on a pie. All of these things individually, you can say, yeah, that makes sense. But it's when you look and you go 25 years, something like 25 Targaryens dying during that period. We started out with this massive family. Now we're down to, I mean, who's left? To the extent that Aegon V, when he becomes king, is known as Aegon the Unlikely, because he was the fourth son of a fourth son. He should not have inherited. Nobody thought he was going to inherit. And that somehow all of the intervening people died and he inherited. It's not one death that's suspicious, it's the fact that there are so many in such a short space of time. Andrew K saying Aerys seems generally apathetic to everything but books and knowledge, hence the Greyjoys and the Blackfires seeing such vulnerability, succession issues, and more. Yes, so the Greyjoys is a really interesting one because they saw weakness and they attacked, and the decision seems to have been no decision. From either the king or even from Bloodraven. It was like, okay, well, we'll just let it. That's not what we care about right now. We're focused on the Blackfires. My personal feeling is that Bloodraven was obsessed with the Blackfires and so was just looking for that all the time. Aerys, however, does seem to be a man of limited motivation to do stuff. And he might have heard this, but thought, oh, well, they're not invading. It's not a big thing. The Lannisters can sort it out. The Red Wine Fleet can try and sort it out. The Starks can try and help up north. But that wasn't really what he should be doing. Yeah, so he doesn't seem to be a person who proactively goes and does stuff. And Richard Smith asking in the chat if we'll ever get any clear vindication for Bloodraven's methods at the end, or is it left ambiguous? No, I think it'll be left ambiguous. I mean, I don't think a vindication. I think we will get a clearer idea of all of the things that he did or did not do. I think that's probably going to come through. But I think it will be left to us to decide was it all worth it? Bloodraven clearly has influenced things. He clearly has an end that he is trying to move towards, and he thinks that that is for the betterment of humanity. But has he got everything right? Of course he won't have got everything right. Now I'm going to take 3 questions together from my patrons, which all around the same kind of thing. Dominic Vaughan saying, "Hi Robert, hope you and Dan are well." Yes, we are. Thank you very much. That's Dan the dog. He's again taking himself up to bed. Enjoying the short form content. Good. Do you think Aerys's knowledge or bookishness in part comes from a desire to find the prophecy or rehatch dragons? Michelle Raimo saying, "Hi Robert, I hope all is well. We know Aerys was deep into prophecy, and we can only assume one of the prophecies he was poring over was the Song of Ice and Fire. What are some of the other prophecies that he may have been reading about?" And Maura Lee saying, "Do you think Aerys would have read any books, etc., about the prophecy of the importance of the unification of the 7 kingdoms against the possible threat from the north? Would there have been any books about the others and the threat from the others?" So, what was he reading about? Well, we know he read a lot. We know he cared a lot about prophecy. What did he actually read about? And we haven't got all the information. We do have a rather intriguing throwaway remark by Egg when he says, "Someday the dragons will return. My brother Deeran's dreamed of it, and King Aerys read it in a prophecy. Maybe it will be my egg that hatches. That would be splendid." So Deeran, this is Deeran the Dreamer, Egg's older brother. He, who we met in the Hedge Knight, he, for those who don't know that story, so he was a dragon dreamer, but they came to him so strongly and all of the time that he took to drink to dull so he could just sleep through, so that he would try and retain some degree of sanity, because otherwise these images came at him all the time. We're first introduced to him. We don't know who he is at the time, and he sort of wakes up from a drinking stupor. He sees Dunk, and he says, "I've seen you in my visions. Stay away from me. Just stay away." And he seemed scared of Dunk because of what he'd seen. He also says that he saw a dragon falling on Dunk and dying, and Dunk survives, and that's what happens figuratively. Baelor Breakspear falls on Dunk and dies. And here we read Dunk saying that he dreamed about dragons returning. We should take him seriously, because he does seem to be a true dreamer. But also we find out that Aerys read about that in a prophecy. Now, so that's the only thing we specifically read that he read about, the return of dragons. However, I think we'll have to ask ourselves whether or not by this point, we've asked this pretty much every single Targaryen ruler, but it's always worth doing. Is it possible that the Song of Ice and Fire, that vision, Aegon the Conqueror's vision that he had, that the 7 kingdoms had to be united because of this great threat from the north, the others coming, and the Targaryens had to rule, that got passed down from ruler to ruler? We know that by the time it gets to Danny doesn't know anything about this. Rhaegar seems to rediscover it in something he read. Somewhere along the line, it seems to have got lost. We thought probably the most likely place was with Baelor the Blessed. He did book burnings. He got rid of lots of things that he thought, anything about dragons, anything magical, anything he thought was heretical. He got rid of all of that. That's the most likely place for it to go. However, here, what seems to have happened is, and you can see this dotted through the Targaryen kings ever since the end of the Dance of the Dragons, that initial prophecy about the Targaryens have to be on the throne and the Seven Kingdoms have to be united, that seems to take second place behind a new vision which seems to crop up again and again, or a new desire that the dragons have to return. Now, you could kind of say initially this was just a recognition of the geopolitical situation. The Targaryens were so much stronger as a family when they had dragons, obviously, because somebody rebels against them, they just fly over on a dragon and they can end that war just in one go. Without dragons, they can't do that. So when Aegon III, who started out very, very anti-dragon, when we read that he, towards the end, tried to hatch dragons, that strikes us as being more to do with political necessity than anything else. But this desire comes back in weird ways. This Targaryen after Targaryen has this this desire for dragons to hatch. Here we get Aerys reading about it and being convinced that this was going to happen. Daeron seems to dream about it. Aegon IV seems to want to make mechanical kind of steampunk dragons that only managed to burn down half the Kingswood. Aerion Brightflame, Aerion Targaryen, wanted to become a dragon and drank wildfire. It killed him, of course. Aegon V later in life became obsessed with hatching dragon eggs. It seems that this is the thing which has now overtaken the original prophecy in the minds and hearts of the Targaryens. This, we have to hatch the dragons. And it's almost as if there's something which is trying to guide them down this right path. First of all, you have to leave Valyria. That was Daenerys the Dreamer. Then you have to be taking over the Seven Kingdoms. You have to be ruling that as the United Seven Kingdoms. Then, when the dragons have gone, you have to get dragons back. Then Dany starts, when Dany gets the dragons back, she then starts getting dreams about what to do with the dragons, how to fly them over and burn all of these kind of ice creatures. It starts getting very specific. So the prophecy seems to morph and merge. Is it likely that he read about it? Yeah, I think that's entirely likely. Whether he would have passed this on to Maekar, we're left with another breakpoint, because they don't seem to have got on very well. And Maekar was not his heir for most of his rule. So we reach another breakpoint where perhaps he did not pass this on to his heir. Okay, let's go to Maura Lee. Hi there, Maura, saying just a show of love and support, and a huge thank you for the fabulous patron gift of the Bloodraven t-shirt. Love you, you are the best. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying the t-shirt. It's fantastic, and I hugely appreciate your support. Kirsty Angel saying the super chat feature is not showing or not enabled. It should be. I have been getting super chats through, so I don't know what's going on there. Moderators, if perhaps you could try and help out with that. The Rabbi Mitra saying salutations, Robert, and to you too, sir. In light of the upcoming Joe Magician stream, can we hypothesize if Dragon Dreams made Aerys such a bookish recluse? Well, I don't know what stream Joe Magician has got coming up, but I'm sure it'll be excellent and full of some wonderful theories. But can we hypothesize if Dragon Dreams made Aerys such a bookish recluse? We can certainly hypothesize it. I don't think we've got evidence one way or the other. I think that there's certainly evidence of people with dragon dreams around him. And if you had to pick a ruler, him or Maekar or Deer the Second, he's the more likely. So I think, yeah, we could hypothesize it, but I don't think we have the full evidence there. As I say, this is the height of magicness. We've got all around this period, we've got so many magical characters. Targaryen, Deer the Dreamer, we've got Bloodraven, we've got Shearer, Seastar. This guy here is obsessed with magic. The Grand Maester is obsessed with magic. We've got all of these magic-y focused people going on. Even Maester Aemon gets dragon dreams as well. Egg, who is alive during this period, we know he starts getting obsessed with dragon. We haven't heard of him getting dragon dreams, but he becomes becoming obsessed with dragons. So, and we have people who are referred to as simple in a way that is the same kind of language was used for people like Elena as a dragon dreamer. So there are a lot of them around at the time. Is he specifically a dragon dreamer? I genuinely don't know, but I see absolutely no reason why that would be why that wouldn't be the case. Andrew K saying the loss of dragons likely contributed to the madness and erratic behavior. Seems to crop up way more frequently in the post-dragon era than before. Yeah, I mean, depends what you count as madness and erratic behavior, really. You had some pretty strong Targaryen characters beforehand. What I would say is that the erratic behavior was more strongly focused on this one issue of getting the dragons hatched, getting the dragons back. And afterwards, understandably, they weren't there. So there seemed to be more people who were getting these kind of dragony dreams than before. Let's go. And Reflective Rambling saying about the super chats. I know sometimes people have issues when they're mobile or in certain countries or areas. Yeah, so I think it's more likely something. Yeah, the setup there rather than here, because I say there are super chats coming through from other people. Randa Ben Mitra just clarifying about the stream with me. Isn't one coming out? Well, I will be doing another stream at some point with Joe Magician. I mean, I was talking to him a while back about this. I think we will probably do it closer to House of the Dragon season 2 and talk maybe about some of his theories there with Larry Strong and the Weirwood Network and how that is all playing out in that series. So yeah, that's what I think I've mentioned that before. Which is what's going on. Michelle Alaimo saying, speaking of magic, do you think coming up in the Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring that we will see a magical renaissance and that magic will be here to stay in Westeros once the wars end? Well, I certainly think we're going to see the books again to get more magical. The book 1 as a sort of a pithy way of how George R. Martin approached it is that he wrote a high fantasy story masquerading as a low fantasy story. So when you get book 1, A Game of Thrones, you get the prologue, very high fantasy, the others are there. You get the last chapter, we get dragons. The vast majority of what happens in the middle of that book, no magic. We get a chapter of Bran's magic dreams. We get a few hints of things here or there, but the characters like Maester Lewin, like Tyrion, who we're basically told these are the clever and wise people, openly mock the idea of magic and magical beings. So it's masquerading as low fantasy. If you remember watching season 1 of Game of Thrones, people were engaging with, there wasn't real magic going on. People were engaging with it as a sort of a medieval sort of political show, really, as much as anything else, which it was. When you start getting into book 2 and even into book 3, you're getting some characters who are still openly saying that magic doesn't exist, but some characters like Tyrion is starting to go on a journey with it. He's experienced that up at the wall, people who are very sensible are genuinely concerned about magical others who are going to come and attack, and the dead attacking. Lots of people are starting to talk about dragons, and this is just starting, and we obviously see the dragons there, and we start to see Bran's magic, and we see the link with direwolves that starts cropping up again and again and again. We start to see the magic of people like Melisandre. We get to see people coming back from the dead, and it starts from just like a couple of little incidents here and there. It starts absolutely mushrooming out to the point where the Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring will be very high fantasy. There will be magic happening everywhere. Does this mean that after the end of the story, it's still going to be that magical? Probably, following the internal logic. George R. R. Martin, he's a Gardner writer. He might change anything on this story as he's writing it, but probably following what we understand from magic, no, because the others will in some way be dealt with. Now, probably that doesn't mean just the forces of humans amass a massive army and defeat them. Probably that's not. Somehow the magic that created or brought or introduced to the others in some way will be undone. Now, that the magic that created them almost certainly was, big digression here, but the magic which created them almost certainly was the big bit of magic way back in time that caused the seasons to go out of balance. This is, we're told this in the very first book, before this was massive, when this was just a new story by a well-regarded but not wildly successful fantasy writer. A new book called A Game of Thrones came out. It had on the back the blurb which George R. R. Martin would have completely, he will have approved this, and it starts out many years ago, a preternatural event caused seasons to go out of balance. That is the starting point. That's what we're told. So the preternatural event, a thing happened, a magical thing happened that caused the season to go out of balance. That, as a massive arc for this story, has to somehow be put right. When that is, then the seasons should start to, the planet should go back to how it should have been. That's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is the dragons. The ambient level of magic in the world went up a notch when the dragons returned. It had gone down a notch when the dragons disappeared. It went back up a notch when the dragons returned. We hear a couple of different examples. We get Tyrion is there talking to the pyromancers in book 2. He's trying to get wildfire for his cunning plan to defend King's Landing. And the pyromancers say, we've just noticed that, we're good at doing this, but suddenly this has got really easy to make this wildfire. The magic-y stuff, there's something big and magical. Is there any chance any dragons have come back? And Tyrion said, not that I've heard of. But you clock it. Okay, so the alchemists think there's a link between the dragons being there and how easy it is to do sort of fire magic. Then we get over on the other side of the world when we get to Karth. and we meet Quaithe. And Quaithe tells Danny that now that the dragons are here, people can do more magic than they used to be able to do because they have just upped the ambient level of magic. She says there's a guy who used to do just tiny little bits of prestidigitation with fire magic. Now he's creating ladders out of fire and climbing up at them and disappearing. And that's because of the dragons. So the dragons being there creates a higher level of ambient magic in this world. At the end of it, are all the dragons still going to be? Probably some of them will die. Maybe all of them will die, but the magic level will probably come down. So that's a very long, a bit of a digression, but a very long answer to the question. Will we see a magical renaissance? We will certainly see lots more magic in the last two books. Will magic be here to stay once the war's ended? Certainly the magical level, I think, will come back down again. Probably not completely disappear. There are some forms of magic, like the old gods' magic, that seem to be largely unaffected by this. It's very focused in on the continent itself. Yeah, the overall ambient level of magic should come back down. Let's go. I think I had another question. Okay, let's go to question from Alison, saying so many rebellions happened during Aerys' reign. The Blackfires in the Iron Islands, wildlings up north. Rebellions happen often in Westeros, but usually as a result of a succession crisis to the Iron Throne. However, we don't have that here. What do you think contributed to so many happening during Aerys' time? Am I forgetting another time where similar events happened? Well, yeah, there's in a 12-year reign, there were some rebellions that happened here, but I don't think this is any more pronounced than other times. There was a golden period when Jaehaerys and then Viserys I were in power, when there was broadly peace. But the first period before that there was rebellions all the time. Faith were rebelling all the time. Then obviously you got lots of different Dornish rebellions. The Vulture Kings came one after another. The Dornish Wars happened. When you move past this, you'll find lots more smaller rebellions do happen. So yes, rebellions are always going on during this period. I don't think that there's specifically more here. What you will find is that the Blackfire rebellions, yes, there is a line of causality I outlined a little bit earlier in the stream. You can draw a line of causality from the way that the spring sickness impacted the continent over to the Blackfire rebellions. That doesn't appear to be particularly something that Aerys was responsible for. However, he was perceived as weak, which did lead to the Greyjoys. Now, the Greyjoys, it wasn't really so much a rebellion against the rule of the Targaryens as we're just going back to how we like to live. Yes, it would have to be counted as a rebellion, but it wasn't we're going to come and try and take over from you, in the same way that the Blackfire rebellion, they wanted to take control. So I don't think that there's a particularly higher level of that going on here. Where we're at, I think we have to remember, is this period where the Targaryens don't have dragons, and they have just ended what was relative. I mean, it's hard to say it was a peaceful and strong reign from Deer II, because we had the Blackfire Rebellion right in the middle of it. But other than that, that was dealt with decisively The Dawn was brought into the Seven Kingdoms. The Seven Kingdoms were in a relatively strong situation, but everybody knew that the Targaryens didn't have the dragons anymore. Reflective rambling, picking up a question for Richard Smith. Thank you. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for other people. Do we know if the Targaryen obsession with magic was off-putting to the other great houses? Did it contribute to their decline in authority? Interesting question. I don't think there are many kings of Targaryen kings who were actively seen as magic users. So, for example, Aegon the Conqueror, yes, he had a dream, a prophecy, but he was just seen as a conqueror rather than a magic user. Maegor dabbled with dark arts. Not him personally, but he did surround himself with people like the Tower who were allegedly magic users. But Jaehaerys, not really so much. Viserys, not really so much. Aegon IV, not really so much. So the big and I say big and impressive rulers, the rulers who reigned for long periods of time, were not actively magic-y type rulers. This period we have here is the only time really when magic is seen to be a key part in how the kingdom is run. So you got someone like Maegor the Cruel. Yeah, he had somebody in who used magic, but that wasn't the key thing in how the kingdom was run. The key thing in how the kingdom was run was Maegor would come out there on his massive dragon and he would burn you if you rebelled against him. Under Aerys and Bloodraven, everybody thought that this was magic. There's magic going on. This is how they know so much about what was happening. Bloodraven is really running the country. Bloodraven is doing magic-y stuff. Bloodraven, his paramour, Shira Seastar, is doing magic-y stuff. Does this undermine them in the eyes of the other lords? Yeah, I think it did. But I think they were a bit scared because suddenly they've got something different and more powerful. After just being like a house again, they now have gone back up in power. Did this in the longer run speed their decline? Well, Maekar wasn't particularly magical. After him, we get Aegon. Aegon was, yes, he ended with this focus on hatching dragon eggs, but he started his reign by proactively trying to make the Targaryens more integrated with the Seven Kingdoms, care about the small folk. That was what the focus was. Even when you get to people like Aerys II, he was obsessed with fire and wildfire. That was just seen as cruelty, not magic. If he loved fire but wasn't burning anybody, then it's like, oh, okay, he's just like being a Targaryen. So was it off-putting? Yes, but I don't think it happened that much. Bear Island Josh saying, could the reflective rambling picking this up? Thank you. Could Aerys' study of prophecy been the reason he relied so heavily on Bloodraven in the first place? Bloodraven as a Rasputin figure. Well, yeah, quite possibly. So I think this is, as I said a bit earlier, I think this is probably part of the reason why he was chosen to be Hand of the King, that kind of simpatico thing going on there. So was the study of prophecy the reason why he relied so heavily? I think instinctively he didn't want to rule. It's the honest answer, and I think we can take the magic out of all of that and just say instinctively, Aerys I hadn't expected to be king. He didn't particularly want to be king. when he found there was somebody who could rule for him, but seemingly had no particular desire to be sort of like king himself, he was very happy to. I think that was the main driver in what was going on. Maybe we don't have enough information about this, but maybe they did all come together and share all of their magic thoughts and try and figure out what to do. Bloodraven's starting to get his ideas about, the prince that was promised and how do we make sure the right people get on the throne. Maybe they did discuss all of this, but we just do not know that yet. What we do know is that probably the main driver is just Aerys not wanting to rule. Okay, let's go to Richard Smith saying, much obliged, off to bed. Good night. I hope you sleep well. Let's go to a question from Ty Farnsworth saying, hey, Robert, watching today wearing my Bloodraven shirt, which arrived in the mail last week. Feel free to plug merch here. Okay, I will do a very quick merch plug. If you're watching this down below, probably you will see a link to my merch shop. The t-shirt does just come in t-shirt. You can get it on a mug, a mouse mat, whatever you want. The When in Doubt Blame Bloodraven t-shirt, which was long promised and has now arrived, and I think looks amazing. Sam Rixian designed it, and I think it's fantastic. If you are interested in that, there is a link down there. While I'm doing this kind of thing, patrons, thank you. I always thank you. I always mean it. I cannot do what I do without your support, so I hugely appreciate it. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon. There will be a link appearing at the end of the live stream. If you're watching back a bit later, there will be a link down in the description. And moderators, thank you. You are amazing. If you're watching this live, if you're in the chat, the reason why it's such an uplifting place where people can just relax, talk about things that they enjoy, it's because the moderators make it that. So could you just please put a little bit of love in there for the moderators, because they are amazing. But Ty Farnsworth, thank you very much for prompting me to plug things. You said, on the topic of Bloodraven, how did his involvement in the King's Council influence the public opinion of Aerys during the many disasters and rebellions that plagued his reign? As always, thank you for all you do. So we've covered this from a few different angles already, but I think one thing that we can probably add in here is the fact that because Bloodraven was so ubiquitous, so impressive, he was not just Hand of the King, he was also Master of Whisperers. He also was heading up the King's army a huge amount of the time. He was doing single-handed combat against the King's greatest enemies. He was seemingly everywhere doing everything. Because he was such a big personality and doing all of these different things, that made Aerys look weak, because he was quite a weak king already. But it's like, he's not running the country. Bloodraven's running the country. Is he really even king? So that was what the biggest difference, I think, was. People just simply did not know who Aerys was or what Aerys was about. They just thought Bloodraven is ruling this. Bloodraven dealt with stuff and was efficient and he was effective, but it wasn't ever with a care for the small folk. That didn't seem to be the top of his mind. So the way that he ruled was it impacted on people's understanding of how Aerys was. Is that if Aerys had come out and said, I think we should prioritize making sure that everybody's fed, getting good sanitation in King's Landing, whatever it is, then that would have given him a much better public profile. But he didn't do that, and Bloodraven wasn't focused on that. So Aerys came out looking weak. Commander Ray saying Aerys's heirs die a lot. True. These accidental deaths, or you say accidental deaths with air quotes, have often been attributed to Bloodraven, along with the weird death rate of the Targaryens as a whole during this time. And while that theory may have merit, I would like to posit another. So another possible person responsible is no one. What are your thoughts on the faceless men thinning the royal line, perhaps from help within the family? Okay, so the faceless men, I did a video quite recently actually on who did the faceless men kill. And one of the things which, all through history, because we know a few people they killed, but who else might they have killed? The thing which came out again and again from that was that because of the way they operate, the faceless men operate by killing people in a way that looks like an accident. So if they did it, it might not look like them. So what you have to do is look for accidents and say, is there a chance that was a faceless man? Which means that there are some things, like, for example, completely randomly, if you go back in time to Septon Moon, that does not feel like a faceless men assassination attempt at all. This idea that he could have got his throat slit and then the assassin goes running, screaming through the camp afterwards, that's not their style. Their style would be he accidentally drank himself to death, or he got caught up in some argument with somebody. Something like that would have felt like them, not something which drew attention to itself. So for this to be faceless men, you'd have to say, are there accidents that feel quite suspicious and somebody benefits from it? Now, a lot of these could fit into that. I think we can be quite clear, Baelor Breakspear probably doesn't fit into that. Choking on a lamprey pie certainly seems like the kind of accident that we might get. The mishap that led to the death of one heir, the taking of her own life after the ball with the incident of the box, the rat, and the whatever it was, that also sounds slightly suspicious, but we haven't heard any more information about that, so it's quite hard to sort of go any further. But the big issue here is that the faceless men assassinate because somebody has commissioned them to. So they would have to have somebody pay them for this. And if somebody's going to be paying them, the price for killing someone goes up the more high profile and difficult the job is, and the potential target. So killing an heir to the throne, say, would be hugely expensive. Killing several of them over the course of a few years would be astronomically expensive. It would have to be somebody who had access to that kind of money. Who, again, we could say, yes, maybe it's Bloodraven, but then you're back to the same thing, because that's just Bloodraven, and the way that he went about doing it was by hiring the faceless men. So you get into quite a circular argument, because the moment you say this could be the faceless men, you have to say, well, they're just an instrument. Who hired them to do it? Now, is there anyone who benefits from all of these heirs dying mysteriously? Well, ultimately, Maekar does. Do we think that that's actually him? He doesn't. We'll talk more about him next week, but he doesn't seem that kind of person. He comes across closest to. He's not the same by a long stretch. But if you imagine a character a bit like Stannis, who just he wants to do his duty. He doesn't get any real pleasure in life. He just needs to do the thing he needs to do. You would never for a moment imagine Stannis, who he got involved in the murder of Renly, obviously, but that was somebody who was claiming the throne when he shouldn't. Stannis would not have killed his brother Robert because he thought his brother Robert deserved to be the king. So that's the difference. Maekar does not seem to actually have a motive. Um, is there anyone else within the wider family tree? Again, you have to say only somebody who wants it to get over to Maekar and Maekar's sons. And the only person who possibly seems to be wanting that along those lines, potentially, I think, is Bloodraven. So, yeah, maybe it was the Faceless Men, but it's who hired the Faceless Men. And as Graham saying, Maekar is nicer than Stannis. I agree. I wasn't saying that they're the same. I was just saying, just as a ballpark, so that people can kind of understand. Let's go to a question from Zach Nadeau, saying, greetings from New England, Robert. Greetings back to you. We're told more than once that Aerys I was more interested in learning than anything else, and that his marriage went unconsummated. Do you think that he is a rare example of a completely asexual character in George's world, or is there more to the story? And 444 saying, do you think that Bloodraven just used his influence on the king, or did Aerys cooperate with him? As he was one of the Targaryens really interested in prophecies, maybe he was convinced as to the importance of Maekar's line, and that's the reason why he has no issue of his own. So, did Bloodraven use his influence, or was this Aerys cooperating? I think probably a little bit of both. That's my instinct. Yes, Bloodraven was running the Seven Kingdoms, and Aerys was happy with that. But I think that has to be an element of cooperation going on there. We know of at least one time when he put down his foot and said, no, we're going to do it this way. So that seems to imply that the rest of the time he was at the very least allowing Bloodraven to do what he wanted. As to, and this is kind of building on the last question, really, as to the question of whether or not he was not having children and as a way to kind of fulfill prophecy, it's possible. We do not have the information on that, because this started early on. This started before he came to the throne. He got married, and he apparently didn't consummate the marriage. So this doesn't, and that seemed to have been the case before he thought he was going to be king. So he thought this didn't for one moment think that this was going to impact on the line of succession, because we had two people ahead of him in the line of succession. So it does seem that he is just asexual. He does seem to be not interested in that. He just seems to be more interested in reading, and fair play to him. You're right. I think this is a rare example in George R.R. Martin's world of that. But he does try to pick up quite a broad spectrum of people. So, yeah, this kind of makes sense. Might he have then been have come to an understanding of the importance of Maekar's line along with Bloodraven and helped hasten it along? Again, I don't think we've got the information on this one yet. It's possible. I blame Bloodraven, but that's because we've seen Bloodraven operating all the way through this. We simply do not. I mean, I struggle to think if we know of any actual words, no quotes at all we get from Aerys. That's how withdrawn he was. We don't actually see a few things that he did, but that's about it. Nate Davis saying, why do you think Aerys decided not to execute Bittersteel? Now, this was one of the decisions he made. We've talked about this a couple of times without really speculating on why. But I'll give the context to it, and then we'll try and figure out what might be going on. The first Blackfire Rebellion wasn't, we covered this a couple of weeks or so ago, wasn't just Damon Blackfire waking up one morning and going, I think I might rebel now. I want to be king. It's very clear that Aegor Rivers, Bitter Steel, was the person who was pushing him and pushing him and pushing him to become king, to rebel. And he was the person who was there at the very end when the rebellion was quashed. He took the sword Blackfire back and he set up what was basically the Blackfire Continuity Army, being the Golden Company, all of the people who'd been chucked out or decided to exile themselves from Westeros because they'd supported the Blackfire rebellions. They were there. He was holding this army together, waiting for the right moment to come back. Always a threat over there that they would come back and try and take the throne once more. Eventually, he wasn't involved in the second Blackfire Rebellion, but the third Blackfire Rebellion, he was. He gets Hagon, his new heir, over, and they get defeated. Just as an entire random thing here, George R. Martin doesn't tell us much about the third Blackfire Rebellion in terms of the details of what happens, but he just gives us throwaway things. He's certainly going to be covering this later on in Duncan Egg, which is why he didn't. He says it's written in this kind of way that the Maesters sometimes do, or George R. Martin sometimes makes the Maesters do, to just sort of throw a few things out there just to frustrate us slightly. And he says they get. We don't need to tell you more about what happened. Everybody knows what happened there, about Aerian's actions and about Egg's bravery. And it's like, there's a story there. Something happened there. We don't know about it, but something clearly happened. George hasn't told us. Anyway, at the end of this, Bloodraven kills the new Blackfire pretender and captures Aegor Rivers. Now, Bloodraven and Maekar, incidentally, pardon me, want him dead. And you understand it from a very pure realpolitik way. If Aegor Rivers was freed, he could be the figurehead for another Blackfire Rebellion some other point in the future. He doesn't seem to be wanting to give up this fight. But Aerys overrules Bloodraven and says, no, send him to the wall. Now, why is a really interesting question, because it could be for a number of things. It could be that he sees Bloodraven and his obsession with the Blackfires. He is obsessed. He's also very much, he personally hates Aegor Rivers. And this is not the action, it would not be the actions of a man thinking rationally. It may have been geopolitically the right thing to do to kill this person who is going to be coming up with another rebellion again in a few years, surely. But it's not just his rational. This is Bloodraven seeking some kind of vengeance, something personal going on there. He was a rival from when they were very young. So it's possible that Aerys just wanted to assert his authority and test Bloodraven's loyalty, because this was something Bloodraven desperately wanted to do. And Aerys just said, no, we're doing it a different way. This is the king's justice. The king has decided, yes, he's guilty, but his punishment is to go to the wall. Now, that was a huge test of loyalty for Bloodraven. Whether it was intentional or not on Aerys's part, it was a huge test of loyalty, because Bloodraven did not want to do that. But Bloodraven passed. So maybe that's what it was. Maybe this was Aerys finding a bit of backbone, wanting to be doubly sure that this person really did have his back. The question, and I think one of the things you're sort of well, maybe not you, but others have perhaps hinted at, is this some prophetic thing? Because we know that Aerys was very focused in on all of these prophecies. Did he see some sort of vision? Did he have a dream that prompted this? Again, we can speculate if we want to. We don't have any evidence, but we could speculate. We know that Bloodraven himself does go to the wall. He gets sent. He gets basically convicted by Egg. This is years later, and sent up to the wall. When he goes to the wall, he eventually becomes Lord Commander. Then he eventually goes north of the wall. He becomes Throughout Crow, and has a hugely important role in the story going forward. It's possible that Aerys had a vision or a prophecy or read something that made him think one of these great bastards has to go up to the wall for incredibly important prophetic reasons, and maybe he just got the wrong one. As I say, we don't have any. It's speculation because we don't have the evidence. But if we're going to go down that route of, is there a prophetic reason why he might send Aegor Rivers there? That is the reason. Mel Misery saying, who was king when Archmaester Gildane wrote the history of Westeros? Who was king when Gildane died? Okay, well, actually, here we go. We've got the World of Ice and Fire here, which I'm hoping I might be able to show you, because what we've got, well, maybe I can't find it now. I won't be able to find this now. It's written from the perspective of Archmaester Gildane when he is writing it about the great and glorious realm of reign of Robert Baratheon, basically. So that's what it is. All of these, when you go to the beginning of it, you can just see the title page. Couldn't find it there. Never use props live when you haven't prepared them. But that's what it's the idea is. Let's go to Reflective Rambling saying, are we going to get an IDG live version of Reading Rainbow? Is Sanri live animating the tale? Reading Rainbow, I think that's an American thing. But I'm assuming that's reading stories. Randa Bemitra saying maybe Aerys had a dragon dream and interpreted it wrongly. Yeah, I think that's what I was. You said it much more succinctly than me, but I think that's where I was working my way around to. George R.R. Tolkien saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you. I was wondering why Maekar was so angry with Aerys for making Brynden Rivers Hand of the King. Given what happened between Maekar and the last Hand of the King, maybe it's best if he didn't become Hand. It probably would have brought even more rumours. And another very happy customer with their Bloodraven t-shirt. So yeah, if Maekar had become Hand of the King, having accidentally killed Baelor, then yes, that could very well have set some rumours going there. Why was he angry? Well, again, we only really have what the people are saying, that he was angry, that he was forget the words that are used now, but basically in Summer Hall, sort of pacing the halls, being very grumpy. We only really have the rumours on the streets from the people that they talk to, but that probably does come from somewhere. It seems to be a personality clash. As I say, there is no actual reason why logically Maekar should have been made Hand of the King, other than the fact that he thinks that he'd do a better job than Bloodraven. it's a personality clash between him and Bloodraven. Is the issue, and he didn't want Bloodraven being the Hand of the King. Dominic Vaughan. Actually, this I've reached the last of the questions from my patrons. So now is a good time if you're in the chat to drop questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up as many of them as I can. Retro. This is probably why I couldn't find the thing. He did retrofit that back to give them the same authorship. Right. For somebody else, thank you very much indeed. My Jenny's song, Mia and Gwynnis, Bloodraven sisters, equal my Gwynnis song. Gwynnis is a form of Jenny. Do you know anything about myogenic? If so, can you explain it, please? Maybe relevant. I don't know about myogenic. I mean, I think the Gwynnis being Bloodraven's sister as a form of Jenny, and Jenny's song. Jenny is Jenny of Old Stones, and this is the Ghost of High Heart. So the Ghost of High Heart. This is years later, but what we know as Jenny's song. This is when we get Jenny of Old Stones married Duncan Targaryen, the son of Aegon V, and when she came to court, she brought with her the Woods Witch, who later would become the Ghost of High Heart, and then Jenny died at the tragedy at Summerhall, and then we get Jenny's song. This is the lament that sort of comes out from that, the song from the doomed relationship that we've got going on there. Martin S. saying, George R. R. Martin has said that Eddard is intended to be a fictional version of Edward. Can it be assumed that John, Jon, is a version of John, Jamie, Jaime, a version of Jamie, James, and Kevin, a version of Kevin? Yeah, we can assume all of that. He was very open. He uses slight twists on traditional, particularly English names. So yeah, Kevin is a twist on Kevin. He does have Robert, as in Robert Baratheon, but he also has Robert, as in Robert Glover, and Brendan is similar to Brendan. So he often twists one letter. Sir, he uses SER rather than SIR, which is how it is generally written in British English. So that's the way that he tries to give it this instinctive sense of place and setting, in a way that we can kind of understand it, and instinctively the names seem right rather than being completely made up. They feel quite natural. Let's go to reflective rambling. Picking up a question from the Brothers Kryn. Hi there, Brothers Kryn, saying favorite Targaryen king. Oh, I don't know if I have a favorite. Do I have a favorite Targaryen king? Maybe I'll answer that one when I've gone all the way through to the very end. But I think there are some underrated kings like Viserys II. I was quite a big fan of Viserys I, as shown by Paddy Considine. I agree completely with um, George R. R. Martin when he says that character, the characterization there added so much more to what was in Fire and Blood. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a favorite, but I have lots. Kiziglu Bay, did Aerys personally participate in any battles? Not that we know of. No. Um, Reflective Rambling, picking again. You're being very generous today. Thank you, Reflective Rambling. Kerry Sherman asks: As Bloodraven tipped Deeren off on the rebellion, odds that Bloodraven fabricated it in order to further his bloodline pruning plans. So this is back to the start of the first Blackfire rebellion. And if you remember, what happened there was that Daemon was not. He waited, I think it was 8 years before actually launching his coup attempt, his rebellion. Having eventually decided to do so, Bloodraven discovered that they were about to do this, and then told Deeren, and then Deeren decided to do something about it. At which point, Daemon then managed to escape, and then did the rebellion. So actually, Bloodraven sort of precipitated it, and there's possible that Daemon would never have done it. It's possible, we don't know. It's possible he might have backed out at the last minute. So actually, Daemon did prompt that first rebellion. Did he fabricate it? I don't think he fabricated it. I think that he may have played it up to Deeren, but the fact that there were people who wanted a Blackfire rebellion was undeniable. The fact that they were very close to Daemon was undeniable. The fact that Daemon was starting to be talked around by them is undeniable. The only question is, how close to it did they ever get? Did Bloodraven do it in order to further his bloodline pruning plans? I mean, I do like to blame Bloodraven for everything, as you know. This does feel a little bit early for me. He's still at this point 20, 21. So I have a feeling this is just him being uber loyal, if anything. Question from Caius Ballerina. 2 questions. Did Aegor want to overthrow Aerys because he was a big supporter of Bloodraven? I think Aegor wanted this is Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel. I think he hated Bloodraven. But I think that he also was a true believer in the Blackfire side of things, and I think once he was committed, he had to keep on going with that. So I think that's where it was. The second Blackfire rebellion is a curious thing that he did not get involved in. So it was the question was, why did he not get involved? Presumably, he just didn't want that Daemon II. He didn't rate him as the potential king. And off-topic, Caius Ballerina saying, did Robert Baratheon, I assume, hear Rhaegar say Lyanna's name as he died? Yes, so probably. This is what we're told, is that was what Rhaegar said when he died. Robert was there, but this was in the middle of a battle. So there was lots of noise going on. As he died, he got knocked off of his horse, off his feet, splashed down into a river. It could have got lost in all of the other sounds of battle. So If anyone did, he did. Um, Question from where did I get up to? Kind of ballerina picking up for reflective rambling. Oh, it's very kind. Saying, is there any significance to Aerys the First wearing his grandfather's crown? Completely different personalities and philosophies, though both not loved by history. Yes, so he did. He wore the crown um, of Aegon the Fourth. Um, we're not told why he chose that. We are told that Maekar then chose to have a completely new one done rather than to take that crown because he wanted one which was like more strong. I can't remember the exact words that are used, but the impression is that that crown was chosen because this was not about fighting. It's not about war. You choose one that it is. You don't always have a choice, but as a king, they had lots of different crowns. The Targaryens, they didn't just have a crown that is like super important. There was Aegon had a crown, Jaehaerys had a crown. They had lots of different crowns. So, is there a reason he chose that one? I mean, I think probably it was just not not associated with conquering and warfare. Would be the best answer I could give there. Anti-Hero Association saying apologies for an off-topic question, but who is your favourite Premier League team? I'm looking for a club to support. There is only one Premier League team, and that is the mighty Manchester United Football Club. You're very welcome to join us as we march ever onwards, hopefully with new owners very, very soon, to even greater glories ahead. So there you go, entirely unbiased. Another question. Yes, Martin S. saying the two authors you mainly follow on this channel have first names of Beatles members, John and George. And aside from George Harrison, Beatles had a producer named George Martin. Coincidences? Yes, absolutely. Don't really know what to say. That good observation. Um, Vladimir Mitra saying happy Onana Day. It's a good day. Dominic Vaughan, question, said, what was the motivation of Jaehaerys II? So this is several generations later. Jaehaerys II naming Aerys after this king. That's the Mad King. Was he particularly well remembered by history or his main achievements that would provoke him to name his son after him? We don't know. So Jaehaerys named so his son Aerys. This Aerys grew up to be Aerys II, the Mad King. Is there something particular? Is he remembered particularly well by history? Aerys the First, not particularly. He's not. Whenever you find characters in A Song of Ice and Fire who are sort of listing off bad kings or good kings, then they come out with the usual. The Harris was the good king, or maybe they'll come out and say Deeren the Second or Deeren the First, the young dragon, or you get Aegon the Conqueror, who was this great king. Deeren the Second. Some talk about Baelor being so holy. Maegor was obviously the bad king. We get Aegon the Fourth was the bad king. Aerys the First rarely gets a mention in this, so he's not really viewed at either extreme. So why might Jaehaerys name his son Aerys? Now, this is speculation, but I think it's a really intriguing line of thought to go down, because what you find happens at this point is that this is where we think Bloodraven is playing a huge role in trying to manipulate the family tree. We think he was doing it earlier, but this is the point at which we get lots of heavy hints. So the Woods Witch, who we were talking about a little while earlier, who became the ghost of High Heart, she almost certainly is there working on behalf of Bloodraven. The imagery, the color palette, she's got white skin, red eyes. This is Bloodraven colors. And she comes, we're told she comes with a prophecy that the prince that was promised is going to come from the line of Charis and his sister wife. And they do marry, those two, and they have children, and they get their children to marry. So this massive, what we've got when we've been talking here today about Aerys I, this massive family where you could have Egg being the fourth son of a fourth son, has been pruned down all the way to just this one branch where they're not marrying anyone outside, they're just doing this. Apparently, because of prophecy. Aerys was made to marry Raella, his wife, his sister wife, not because they wanted to, but because they were told to by Charis. He says, you have to do this. The only reason we can think of why he would do this is because he thinks that he is trying to fulfill prophecy. If that's the case, the clear implication is that he took this very seriously. He took prophecy seriously. Therefore, he may well have looked back at the old kings and thought, which king actually cared about prophecy? If he thinks that this is the most important thing, which king? And the answer is Aerys I. And when you then compare Aerys and Charis II, Aerys I and Charis II, they are described in not identical ways, but there are echoes there. They're both considered more sort of bookish. They're not. They don't go into battle themselves. So there are echoes there, and I think that is the reason why. Not because he was held up as a great king, but because he cared about prophecy, and Charis II seems also to have cared about prophecy. Nate Davis saying, did you answer why Aerys spared Bittersteel and sent him to the wall instead of executing him? Yes, I did. Thank you. I got that question. I answered that one, I guess, about 20 minutes ago, if you want to skip back on that. Brandy R, pardon me, Brandy R saying, just want to say the mods are amazing on these live streams. I appreciate you all. I agree with that completely. Let's go to Greet Weirwood doing a link to my Targaryen family tree explained video. Yeah, that's when I go through I think that one was when I went through the Targaryen family tree at the time of the Dance of the Dragons. I did do another one where I was trying to plot out the massive conspiracy about Bloodraven pruning the family tree. Just having a quick flick through if there's any more questions I missed. I think probably that's hit most of them. What are we going to be doing next week? We're going to be looking at Maekar. So we've now looked here at Aerys. Aerys dies apparently from natural causes, and Maekar takes over. Now, Maekar we will find next week, but he is faced also, as so many of these kings are, with problems. His particular problem is actually about succession. Who takes over after him? We thought just one king ago there were so many Targaryens to go around that they would never have this problem. But now, just this short amount of period of time later, we've got problems in terms of the succession. I missed the super chat apparently. Happy to quickly flick back. Carl Karstark apparently has it. Oh yeah, here we go. So from Jacob Amabolina. Good evening. Who else in history could Bloodraven have tried to recruit, if any? any previous kings? P.S. You are awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Who could he have tried to recruit? Um, if we're talking here about from when he's in the in as Three-Eyed Crow, recruiting as per Bran, we the interesting thing is when you look at that vision he has, and this seems to be a making contact, just testing out maybe this person could have magical powers, and give him this dream of falling through the air and he has to fly. Um, what you see there in that vision is there's lots of skeletons, dead bodies on the floor just before Bran swoops and doesn't hit the ground, but he does fly. He sees all of these bodies. The clear implication is that Bloodraven Three-Eyed Crow has done this to lots of other people before. The one that we know about, or can be reasonably certain of, is Euron. Euron says this very randomly, I think to Victarion. He says, when I was younger, I had a dream about could I fly? And then all of his imagery from then on, he is he's the drowned crow. He's got the crow symbolism, so that the crow came to him. He keeps this symbolism, and then all the way through, when you track him and his kind of move into magic, it's a mirror of what happened with Bran. He's being the anti-Bran. You find that Bran has the weirwood paste, and that opens up his mind to, and his spirit to going through the weirwood network, seeing visions of the past. Euron drinks effectively the paste shade of the evening trees, the shade of the evening drink that makes your lips go blue. That, too much to go into here, but that is an opposite of the weirwood trees. It's black and blue rather than red, white, and drink the drink from it, and that gives you magical powers. But these are twisted and distorted powers, so it's sort of the opposite. So it's like Bloodraven reached out to him, but he didn't pick up on it then. But he's followed the mirror, the dark mirror side of this. Okay, I hope that that answered that one. And Reflective Family, thank you very much for doing a super chat to say that I missed a super chat. That's incredibly kind of you. Right, so I think that's me now caught up. So yeah, next week we'll talk about Maker. And we will, I promise we will do one once we got past this chunk here. We will then do one about Bloodraven himself, so we can see what he did over a period of time and just try and assess what his role was in this moment in history. But for now, it's time to say thank you to my moderators. If you would like to, and my patrons, if you would like to watch more of these live streams, if you're watching it back a little bit later, somewhere around here is going to be a link to some more live streams. Appearing somewhere around here is going to be a link to my Patreon page. That is all for this time. I will be back next week, same time. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.